speaking with Senator David Waters from Dover, New Hampshire, who I've been threatening to speak with for months and months, um, for lots of reasons. But David, I think you are sort of universally known as the Renaissance man of the Senate, even though I'm sure you'd eschew that title.
Well, I take that as a compliment, but I think it refers to the fact that I was an English professor for 39 years. When I start talking, they all say, "Oh, there's the professor again."
Well, that's not so bad. How did you get into politics to begin with?
Well, I think it was family culture. My parents were politically involved. One of my earliest memories is my dad getting beat up by a couple of drunks in a parking lot because they had a Kennedy for president sticker on his car in 1960. But I was a child of the Vietnam era and all the civil rights and so on. And then, particularly when I moved up to New Hampshire in 1978, what a place it is that you show up and there's a lot of campaigns. And I think the Gallon campaign was one of the first ones I did some work on in Newmarket, and then, became involved with the county committee. And when our son went off to school, I met this guy in a basketball court down in Hampton named Obama, who said, I'm glad you like me, but I'm only going to be here for a little bit. And then if you want something done, you gotta do it yourself. And I decided I was going to run for state rep in 2008, and there we are.
Wow. And where did you grow up, David?
I grew up in Connecticut. My dad was a Veterans Administration doctor for 55 years at the Newington VA. So that's notion of public service. And my mom, who had polio when I was just a little baby, went to work for Easter Seals when she got back on her feet. And that public service culture in the family. So that's what I grew up in.
So when you first moved to New Hampshire, were you an educator or were you doing something else?
That was my first job at the University of New Hampshire teaching English. And I had family up here. My aunt and uncle and my five cousins. My grandmother lived in Exeter, so I was no stranger to the seacoast area. But that was my first job right out of graduate school, and I was happy as a clam to be up here in New Hampshire, working at the University of New Hampshire. I loved it. Great students, and of course the political culture. As I said, is just an opportunity to get involved and get out there and make some kind of difference.
Yeah. Well, that was where I cut my political teeth too, working on Jerry Brown's campaign and
Yeah, yes, I remember.
that's it.
Yep. Yeah, and he had some staying power, didn't he, Wayne? Just like you. That's what thing you just keep at it, and sooner or later the world turns around and back in your direction.
Yeah, well, I hope so. That hasn't happened yet, but
Yeah.
uh, oh,
Well, I remember back when I first showed up too, was Guy Chichester and the Clamshell Alliance, and I remember going to Seabrook protests, and it was an interesting time of in the Carter campaign. It just come through in the sense of the grassroots. The grassroots in this state could really make a difference, and that's a great thing about New Hampshire.
it's always struck me that uh, not just uh, tendency toward public service for you, but the emphasis on the importance of community in that process. That's far more important. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's far more important to you in terms of creating our future than any single act of government or anything like that.
Well, I mean that's all we have is our democracy, and our democracy is us. And a lot of my intellectual work, my academic, my teaching work had to do with New Hampshire and the sense of place. And I did an encyclopedia of New England, and it really the kind of question around all that is that how is that a place develops its values, and And then, how is it that places hold on to what they value and then, change too? I mean, I did a lot of my work was on African American history in New Hampshire. And, it's a long, tough history of exclusion and exclusion. And I think that it kind of indicates that you really have to get down into the local level to understand how democracy works and how change can happen. And so yeah, and I think too, there's something New Hampshire, it is a product of its history in so many ways, and that I think is still very much with us. And you look at the struggles that we're going through now, particularly on the environment, um, and renewable energy, and these are things that are that and education as well. I mean, these are things that are so deeply rooted in conflicts and commitments that go back centuries now that you can understand why they become maybe so difficult because they've been difficult for a long time.
And those are the really seem to be the areas upon which you have uh, built your reputation in the Senate anyway.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, it's funny. From the Senate that you get to have your finger in every pie, you know, and I think it's a small group, and everybody has to discuss everything with everybody and across party lines. The culture in the Senate is to help each other out to work, and it is hard to be. The collegiality is sometimes it's hard, but there's a commitment to that, and so I think that whether it's been healthcare. I do a lot of work in the recovery community, but as an educator, and then with a sense of place, I came into when I was elected to the House. Everybody thought, I want to be in an education committee. I said, no, I want to be in fish and game. I want to, I really want to see how people are close to the land, and that really, I was very fortunate. It really set me up to have a kind of new understanding about how the politics works, but also just what, from that perspective, what the environmental challenges are going to mean for the state, and they're going to be enormous. They are, whether it's ocean acidification or the warming or the extreme precipitation, the algal blooms we're seeing. I mean, we got a tough road to hoe ahead of us on the environment. And
What do you
and
see as the sort of focal points that on environmental issues that you have been focusing on and you think we all as citizens need to be aware of?
well, I would say that part of what we're facing with environmental change, um, and a warming environment is that we, in some ways, and we've got to do renewable energy. I'm the head of our offshore wind commission and so on. We've got to do those transitions. We got to have more solar, et cetera, et cetera. We got to do those things. Move, renewable energy economy can be a lot of jobs. It's going to help out the environment, but we are a small state. What we do is not going to mean. I mean, we can be 100% renewables, but that is not going to change the fact that New Hampshire's environment is going to change profoundly. So I have been focusing a lot on adaptation. One of the first things I did was, in a Republican legislature, was to get us our Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission, which at that time, climate denial was very big in the legislature. But to say the sea level is going to rise, we've got a plan for this. We've got a plan for it. And I think it's now with wildlife corridors. I've done a lot of work on that, and then more particularly trying to say, okay, what are we going to do if we, how are we going to? I have a big bill right now, and I've been others in the last few years of adaptation and resilience. How do we understand what's going to happen, and then do what we can for the environment itself, but also for jobs and for the people whose lifestyles are going to change immensely. And so that I think is what we have to do. And I think that the adaptation side is not gloom and doom. I mean, things are going to be tough, but it also is the only way we can imagine a future for our children and grandchildren, and for people who are going to call New Hampshire home for generations to come, that we have to figure out how we're going to live in this new environment, and not only just live, but how we can thrive in it. And that to me, especially, I'm talking to that old man, and somebody who's, I'm an okay boomer, right? And what is our legacy going to be if it's not trying to take on the big problems and see what we can do to open a door to a future for young folks? So that's really what's driving, a lot of what I do. I see myself as a job senator. I'm interested in jobs and career and technical education. That's been huge in my role in the Senate. But it's all about how our families, working families and people who love New Hampshire as their home, or new immigrants that are coming in. What's the future going to be? How can we have this be a good place to live? So that really is just driving an awful lot of what I'm trying to do these years.
Do you feel as though there has been movement on the climate front away from the denialism that was so prevalent a few years back?
I do think there is some movement from that. Uh, the problem is that when you get down to particular policy issues, that the carbon lobby, Americans for Prosperity in particular, are very powerful in the state. So that when it comes down to particular kinds of things, like trying to build out electric vehicle infrastructure, I'm transportation committee. I'm kind of been the lead on electric vehicle stuff for a number of years. You'll find opposition. Or when we look at what other states around us are doing on enabling solar development, Massachusetts recently been getting up to 28% of its energy from solar. New Hampshire is still less than 1%.
Right.
Now, there's reasons for that. Offshore wind, the same way. I think the governor um, he signed my bills and he talks about offshore wind, but in terms of having proactive policies, so we may have moved from denialism and so on, but in terms of saying, okay, here's what the state government can do to help move things forward, that's not happening. It's happening all the states around us, and it's happening in a lot of red states too. Look at South Carolina, Utah.
Right.
I work with legislators in these states, and they're going gangbusters on this because they see it as an economic issue. That the opportunity to develop these resources and to have the jobs there. But I think that's, I think the politics around it have changed, but when it comes down to the actual commitments and issues and willingness to move things forward, it's not been possible with this legislature and in some ways with this governor. So that's. But we got to work together. I mean, I'm very bipartisan, and I just think that I've had some very good partnerships I've developed with some of the most conservative Republicans in the House and the Senate, because we find a way to get down to what's practical and what can we do. And so that's
Yeah.
as you know, I mean, when you're a politician, it's not like you don't shout at each other, because who cares? You're never going to run against each other. You gotta get together and see what you can do.
Right. I've identified with you since I first started watching you, because I think that I conducted myself in the same way when I was in the Senate.
Yes, you
And
did. Yep.
um, I don't think folks in New Hampshire have a full appreciation for sort of the magic of of a small Senate, because you can't piss people off.
Well, you do. You know what you do is and then after you piss each other off, you go into the break room off the floor and you laugh at each other and have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, okay,
So.
that's exactly right.
But I think the magic is in our committees. There are 5 people in our committees, and if you go into that thinking that your job is not to say no, particularly, your job is to say, well, what can we do to fix something?
Exactly.
And then, 5 people on a committee, there's going to be something they're going to want your help on.
Yeah.
And you should help each other out. If it's important for somebody's district and I have something that's important for my district, well, they know best. And I think there's a kind of respect for that. And And it probably also helps that Washington is so screwed up, because I think we can say we just can't have that happen up here. We cannot have our legislature turned into a sinkhole of negativity and inaction. We can't do that. We're responsible to the people in New Hampshire to do better than that. So, you know, and you know what it's about, Wayne, really. I mean, that's why you got stuff done. And
it's it really is remarkable. I think back on uh, Senator Susan McLean from Concord.
oh
Um,
gosh, yeah.
you know, Susan would always, in the middle of what was sometimes contentious debates, she would turn to the most conservative member of the committee that we were working with, and she would say, "My new best friend, Senator, Senator
Well,
Jack Barnes."
well, she, I mean, but there it is, and I think, in the Senate, you kind of look at each other and you can laugh at each other a little bit and figure, well, but, I have had some of my best partnerships with the most conservative members of the Senate, because, I understand where they're coming from. And I also, I think this is part of being an English professor, is that I really listen very carefully, not just to what people are saying, but how they're saying it, and try to think about, like you're reading a novel, what's motivating this person, what are their values, and that I think is just what we deserve, any human beings deserves. But it also means that you can understand, you're not going to change their mind on this. Well, they've expressed some value, they care about something, and maybe that's the way that we can get together on it. And I would say, Wayne, too, we're going to have a big test coming up because of what happened in education funding suit. And I was, before we started to talk, I was thinking this must be deja vu for you all over again.
Oh yeah.
And here we are. We're going to have to decide if we are going to live up to our commitment to the next generations and make sure that they can get a good public education. And this is it. It is going to be tough. I think it's one of those big, huge questions that all the politics will come in. And it's like the environment. The point is, not whether we win or lose a fight, but what really is going to help the next generation and mean that, New Hampshire has a workforce, and New Hampshire is a good place to live. So it's going to test us all, though. This one, it is going to test us.
Well, we're really lucky to have some folks like you who who focus not on what our disagreements are as much as they focus on how we find common ground or build common ground. It's not about the muddling middle. It's about being creative and working together. And I worry that, well, I may have a personal stake in this, but I think 1994 was a tipping point for the comedy in our
Yeah.
committee, in our system. I mean, with Newt Gingrich's contract with America, it just seemed as though all of a sudden we were no longer loyal opposition to one another. We were enemies. And that has made it
Mhm.
harder and harder for us to sort of find that common ground. Um,
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, and I will tell you, Wayne. One of my the figures in the Bible that I find most interesting is Samson. Where, okay, he loses his way, and his values get compromised, and then he gets chained to the pillars. And okay, so he pulls the whole temple down around him, right? Now, I guess that's a righteous act, but you don't have a temple, and you may have your hair back, but you're gone, right? And
right.
and so I do think of that. I think of, Newt Gingrich as that kind of figure, and some of the folks today. But you mentioned 1994, and that blow up was over healthcare, wasn't it? The Clinton healthcare program. And then think about it. Okay, it took 14 more or 16 more years, but we got Obamacare. And then Obama got eviscerated in that next election. But when New Hampshire, when we were struggling over Medicaid expansion and we actually did it, think about, I think back to the backroom conversations with Bob Odell and with Jeb Bradley and and Jeannie Forrester and a couple of Democrats, and we said we've got to find a New Hampshire Senate solution for this, and we got Medicaid expansion, and now, we fought it out again about renewing it, and we did it, and it's helping a lot of people out, but it takes time, and I think that's the problem is the folks who are going to pull the temple down around themselves. Okay, you proved your righteousness, but where are we? Where are we? So it's just, you got to build together.
Now, one of the big battles that you have been in, or that you were involved with during the last 15 years, was the whole Northern Pass battle. And I know that you have said to me that you didn't really see yourself as a critical component of that, but people talked about you,
Yeah,
uh,
I know,
about
I know.
your support, and about the
Yeah.
fact that you were sort of a steadying voice, and Jeb Bradley the same way. I mean,
Oh Lord,
it was
I will tell you on that one, Wayne, that I I think I learned a lot of lessons out of it. Um, and we never took a vote on the Senate floor on Northern Pass, right? There was never an actual moment we had to vote on it.
yeah.
Now, I was for renewable energy and I was for jobs for labor. Um, and I think that, on the other side was the North Country folks who said this is a terrible project, because it's going to the environment. And I think that I came to understand the the feelings around that, and think that maybe that I think that there was a lot of truth to it, and I learned something from that. And I think what we can also see right now, though, is that because of that activism and because of what happened with Northern Pass, look where we are today with Twin States.
Well, let's talk about that a
Yeah,
little bit, would you please,
yeah.
Senator?
Well, there we are. I mean, so it's going to bring in 1.2 gigawatts of power from Canada. The advantage of it for us right now, and why I was particularly interested in it, is it's a bidirectional transmission system,
Mhm.
which means that we have essentially created in Canada a virtual storage capacity of 1.2 gigawatts. And if you want to think of a way of shaving peak demand and getting us off the spikes of prices in natural gas, that's a pretty good bet. And then, as I mentioned, I'm interested in offshore wind. Now, these renewable sources, there's going to be 3.3.5 gigawatts as initial development out in the Gulf of Maine. That's a lot of power.
Mhm.
And if we have a capacity, because renewables it's one of the strongest, it's called the Saudi Arabia of wind out in the Gulf of Maine, because it's one of the most reliable and strongest wind resources anywhere. But it doesn't blow all the time. And it's nice because it blows, the winds are stronger in the winter when there's less sun, so that does help balance out what renewables can provide, solar and offshore wind. But this capacity means that we can essentially send, if we have excess offshore wind power, we can send it up to Canada, and they can use it to hedge and to meet their demand, so that then they're able to supply us with the power out of those dams up there. Now, that all sounds good on paper, but will it work for the folks who oppose Northern Pass? And this, NextEra came in and said, we're going to bury it. We're going to bring it in a different place. We're going to bury it. And then we're going to hook up with the existing transmission line and bring it down to, the Londonderry or wherever, where it can plug into ISO New England, where we already have that capacity. And you know, I mean, I'm not going to speak for folks, but because I don't really know, I'm not up in North Country, but I do see that all the towns along that route have pretty much endorsed it. And so it just suggests to me that, you know, that lesson learned.
Well, the lesson was not learned by Eversource. It was learned by others who paid attention. Don't you?
There you go. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the uh, the donkey was hit over the head with the 2x4 that was a unanimous decision by the SEC and
Hmm.
the Supreme Court, but
Yeah.
uh, it never they never really reached out
Yeah.
to people to develop consensus
Yeah.
as they started. And it seems as though
Hmm.
the folks who are working on this latest project have made an effort to do that.
Well, I mean, we'll see. They've received some of the federal money from the IRA, the IRA Act.
Right.
They had $400 million, basically a guarantee that the federal government will take that much power out of this thing, and the rest of it and the cost of it will be the ratepayers and so on. But the power should be pretty cheap. Um, but I think that looking back, knowing we're going to talk about it, and thinking about, because Sue Shibanoff, who was a colleague of mine at University of Hampshire, and we had a lot of arguments about this, and I think that there were a lot of folks who are not happy with my willingness to entertain it, and I get that, and as I said, I have thought about it, and I think that for me, I think my big picture at that time was that we are entering a climate crisis, and that what is going to happen to New Hampshire and to our planet and to our region in particular with sea level rise and losing the snow economy, um everything else is going to happen, that I think I let that overbalance what the impact of running those power lines. I mean, if that's our problem, we're getting more, we have to electrify the economy and transition away from fossil fuels, and here's a way to do that. um but the consequence was, well, it's going to be, yeah, fine, but it's going to be done on the backs of the folks who live in the North Country, and that's, there we are. And I think I kind of maybe went, overbalanced my bigger climate concerns with the feelings of the folks through whose backyards those transmission lines are going to be
Well,
stretched. So
my
I
sense
get it.
my sense was that they always felt that you were fair. They just, they may not have
Well,
agreed with you on every little thing, but the one concern that seems to still be actively discussed among people is the site evaluation committee issue.
yeah.
The concern that bureaucrats are going to take over the process, and there's already, uh,
Mm.
I think, a tendency to corporate capture of agencies,
Yeah.
even at the state level, that people are worried about.
Well, I think that's a very valid concern. Uh, and I worked very hard with Chairman Vose in the House and with uh, Ranking Minority Member Kat McGee in the House ST&E Committee, and with my Democratic and Republican colleagues in the Senate on the bills about the Site Evaluation Committee. And what we had, the first part of that ref change. I mean, I think what we're trying to clarify in it all is to say that the Public Utilities Commission is where adjudicative practices and debates should take place, and that's the legal authorities in there. All the environmental review should be done in the Department of Environmental Services, Fish and Game, Department of Transportation, et cetera, the departments that by federal statute have to do those things. And that's an important bright line, that we follow the federal law about the environmental issues and so forth. And then when the power companies come in with proposals and the site evaluation, then the legal process and the public process around that is done more or less in the PUC. So the last time, in last spring, we passed the bill that said that the enforcement side of things, how that was going to be done, who did the enforcement on decisions, and that was good to clarify because it was not. And now the proposal is to create a site evaluation committee that it will consist of one PUC member, the chair of the Department of Environmental, the PUC, the chair of the Department of Environmental Services, and a public member. And that the public participation process will take place in two venues. First, it'll be in all the environmental and the other ones that, by federal statute have to be done in that way, and they will have a public hearing process there. And then the adjudicative part over the actual filings will be done by that group. And then the other part of it is that we had that administrator of the site evaluation process who only started to get paid and be able to do the work when permitting fees started to come in. So they couldn't staff up. They couldn't really, there was no source of money for them to operate that. So this bill now, the House Bill 609, which is going to come forward in January in the House, says that office will get kind of folded into the PUC, and so that person can have a salary and staff and support working on some other PUC filings, but the primary responsibility is going to be in site evaluation committee. So I think that's going to strengthen that and mean that there's going to be more capacity there to deal with these very complicated issues. And I think, I'm going into the details. I think we needed to do this. I think we need to, there's no way that we could reach our 30 by 30 goals for offshore wind, or there's no ways that we can reach renewable energy goals that the Biden administration is laying out. And there's that hundreds of billions of dollars coming along to try to get renewable energy for the state. There's no way that we can meet that goal if we don't have a site evaluation process that works. So that's why I got myself interested in this. Again, it's the big picture of how we're going to get the renewable energies projects here and sited. We have to have a system that can get that done. So
Well, a lot of people would argue that the site evaluation process did work with Northern Pass, and that there, as Bobby Kennedy Sr. once said, efficiency led to the camps at Auschwitz, but that's not necessarily the system that you want to develop that responds to people.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Wayne, I would say that I think the result of Northern Pass is what it should have been. And that was, I think, well done, was all said and done.
Yeah.
But I thought the process was chaotic. I mean, Bradley had a bill kind of halfway through that, which tried to address some of the ways in which things were working.
And I think that was a very effective set of reform.
Yeah. So, but right now I'd say that, do we have 3 to 4 years to go through that for every project that comes along?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I don't, I mean, you say something that works. Well, if it takes 4 years to work rather than a year or a year and a half, I'm not so sure. I mean, why can't we have a process that gives us a good and potentially the same result in a year and a half rather than 4 years? So
would we not have had a much shorter process if public service and then EverSource had not decided to handle this in a way that was less than honorable?
Well, I gotta say that I don't remember all the dishonorable things. I'm sure that the people, but you know what, I mean, I was not that close to a lot of that because
Yeah.
it wasn't coming through
Well,
my area.
my
But so
my point.
I will take I will take, I will accept your perspective on it. I think that from what I have seen with the site evaluation process, that we had difficulty. I mean, I was on the study committee 2 summers ago that we had, and boy, do we hear from a lot of people. And it seemed to me that there were some real issues about the unwieldiness of it, and whether, you know, people, there were a lot of trouble getting quorums at meetings, a lot of trouble. And there was a lot of trouble having continuity of folks who, it's a lot of work, who were able to put the work in to learn about the issues. So I think that there was some, I mean, I think there was some kind of concern, and we were in a period where there haven't been a whole lot of big projects coming forward. One of the things that was recommended out of that study committee was to say if it's under 100 megawatts, or if it's not leaving a community, then maybe they don't have to go through the whole process. I know there's a lot of federal money in the IRA bill about if you have a power plant that's running on a fossil fuel and you want to switch it to a renewable like hydrogen, or, and I mean green hydrogen, not gray or other kinds, green hydrogen, or if you want to put a big solar facility up, there's a lot of money from the feds right now for that, and a lot of price guarantees and so forth. And maybe those are projects you'd want to be able to happen in the site evaluation process to be kind of streamlined for some of those. So
Mhm. Yeah.
that's where I'm coming at it from, is
Right. No,
I like the fishing.
I hear where you're coming at it from. I just, uh, I'm always concerned, as Ray Burton used to say, when government takes things out of the hands of the people in the state.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I'll give you
a
a
lot
little,
of
let me give
times
you,
when
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of times when you get
Yeah,
so-called reforms, what you're
yeah,
really talking about is ways to make it easier for a governor or the
yeah,
head of an agency to
yeah,
get what they want, as opposed to
yeah.
what they should be after.
Well, I will give you a little bit of history on this, because New Hampshire played a big role in what happened with water power in the 19th century. In that, under English common law, if somebody dams up a river and it floods your farm, or means the fish can't get to you, you had a right to go and take it down. Now you can see why that would come out of common law, right?
Right.
But when the mills started to want to develop and put their dams up to create impoundments, could you have, one town upstream from another town, or downstream from another town, sending their select people and a group of people go up to pull down a dam or to do what they're doing? And riparian law in the 20s, 30s, 1820s, 30s, and 40s, a lot of that came out of cases in New Hampshire, because obviously of the Boston Corporation building up the mills through, you know, Lawrence, Manchester, Chester, and Dover and Newmarket too. They were, Newmarket was before Lowell, and so that kind of law started to set in place what is the public interest. What is the public interest, and when does the public interest overrule the local and the individual?
Mhm.
And that's what we're fighting about, isn't it? I mean, actually, you go even farther back, it's
Understand.
Robin Hood, man. The Robin
Right.
Hood ballads were being sung in New Hampshire up until the 1940s, and it's about, the closing off of the public lands. And so what's the public good? And right now we're in the same kind of situation, the dealing with the fishing interests and building offshore wind. Well, okay, who owns the bottom? And what happens if those offshore wind towers, which are going to maybe mean that the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on the planet, and we lost shrimp. I think we could lose lobster. It's a $600 million industry. But then you want to take some of that bottom up with offshore wind towers, public good versus fishermen. And I think, I've been working hard to get that one kind of worked out, and the fishermen are pretty pleased with the process and the areas that are being excluded from development out in the Gulf of Maine. But it's the same, it's the Northern Pass. It's the same thing. What is the relationship between a larger public good and the local control? And that's a tough one. That's what we debate in the legislature. But you know what I'm saying. We probably need a government to do the public good. It's right there in the first words of the Constitution. Public welfare.
Right. Well, there are a few people that I feel as comfortable with as I do with you, Senator Waters, to be making those kinds of difficult choices as we move forward. What do you see as by the way, have you read Who Owns the Wind?
No, I've not.
Okay.
I'll write that recommendation down.
Yeah, I'll send you the information about it. I interviewed the fellow who
Ah,
wrote it a while back, and it's very, very interesting stuff. And he comes up with some very interesting suggestions about moving forward to actually build out wind power in the country. But he's concerned that we're just not going to be able to do it fast enough, which is where you're at with what you said about the SEC, this Site Evaluation Committee, that we need to be able to move quickly.
well, remember President Franklin who said, "Make haste slowly."
Yeah.
So, and I'll tell you, Wayne, too. I'm the English professor, and I'm a politician. I will talk my best game and do my twists and turns, but I can be wrong. I mean, I know that, and I will, and I think that sometimes I have been, and I think that the point is that people who get to sit in my seat ought to be willing to listen and be told by folks that they're wrong, and then of course the voters will decide if they are too. But I mean, the way our districts are, getting elected is one thing, but then doing the right thing is probably another. And so that's why I think it's best for people who have some power, because it's vested in you to make sure that you realize you could be wrong. And I remember David Souter once quoting, I'm not sure where this was, over some court building back in Roman times, that is carved over as "Consider you may be wrong." And that's we better be humble.
Yeah. Well, that humility, I think, is a trademark of yours. But so is that why you haven't decided to run for a higher office in New Hampshire?
Hey, listen, you got to know yourself, and I think I've hit my glass ceiling, man. I think I've enjoyed being a senator. I really the opportunity to serve the people in the district and the people of the state. It is such an honor, but I realize, you got to realize where you fit in, right, in anything you do. And I think I'm able to do some good things in the Senate, but boy, I don't think I have I never have thought I'd have the capacity to get into a bigger arena, and I don't think I'd be the right person for it. I admire. I mean, I look at some of the folks who have run for other things, or our federal delegation. I think, my goodness, what extraordinary people. And also, I mean, they're giving their lives fully to it. I mean, I like to be able to go see our son dance and have time with my wife and family. And I like to be able to sit and read a little bit, or go outside and work in the garden. And no, I mean, it's, I, I don't have that kind of drive, I guess.
Well, that brings me to the topic of your son, who is apparently an extraordinary dancer. And tell us a little bit about him, if you want to
Well,
brag on
I'll
your
be a
boy.
proud, I'll be a proud papa. His little body started wiggling when he was about a year and a half, and it was turned into a dancer. And he's at Houston Ballet. He's a first soloist down there, and it's just extraordinary. That your kids spread their wings and fly. And he's the dedication and the discipline and the beauty of the art of ballet is quite extraordinary. But I think too, if you check him out, Harper Waters, online, you see he's a big activist. Harper's adopted, he's African American. He's a big LGBTQ activist as well, and he's using his voice to try to to show people, young people in particular, I think, that there is a future for you. That you can live a full life, um, particularly in these times when it's so dark. The kind of bias right now that's being expressed, and so my wife and I are immensely proud of him. Going to go down there and see him dance in a couple weeks.
Great.
Nutcracker, of course, and a gala that they do. So I think that I've seen more nutcrackers than any other person in captivity. Okay, starting about age when he was about 4, and you have to go to every show, right?
Right, right. Well, I just have heard amazing things about him.
Well,
And
I appreciate your asking. I'm proud. It's nice to get to crow about your kids, and
yeah. Senator David Waters, thank you so much for spending some time with me. We are so very fortunate to have a man of your caliber uh, in the state Senate.
well, thank you, Wayne, and right back at you. I looked up to you when you were down in the Senate, and it just so much. It's just wonderful to have a good conversation with you, and thank you so much for the time today.
Well, I hope we talk again soon.
Me too. Bye bye.